You are listening to Pre-Market Prep. I'm Brianna Valesky in for Joel Elconin. I have Andrew Zatlin on the line. He's the editor of Moneyball Economics. Andrew, thanks for joining us from Silicon Valley this Wednesday morning. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So, you are the editor of Moneyball Economics. To get started, can you give us a little of your background and how you got into big data economic analysis?
Sure, absolutely. I'm a numbers guy, I guess you could say. I've always had a love of numbers, and I found that a combination of that plus big data has served me well in my career in the sense that decisions are best made from I believe, a data-based viewpoint. Once you've got the facts, once you've got the information, it's a lot easier to get to a good decision that works, and it's a lot easier to win over people to joining what you think should be done. So I did that a lot in my career, but then I found that with the internet, there's a lot of data out there, a lot of noise, but a
Yeah.
lot of new data, a lot of signal. And if you're familiar with Moneyball, I think most listeners probably have seen the movie. Brad Pitt. That's me. I actually look like Brad Pitt. That's how I got my start. Was a
Oh,
stunt
yeah.
double. But I mean, in essence, if you're familiar with the book, Billy Beane, Oakland A's manager, what the idea was, there comes a point in time when sometimes an outsider with a fresh perspective can come in, and in addition, sometimes information, the real information that tells you what's going on, what's often called business intelligence, but the not the data, but the information is different from what people think is really going on. So in the case of Moneyball, I guess what I mean is all of a sudden they realized that the game of baseball had changed, and the way to measure what was going to create a successful team, what was going to basically create the runs, was different from what people thought. And they used all this data to show that you had 100 years of baseball statistics. So what I've been doing is I've been going out and with a fresh mind saying, look, um, what if you didn't come straight out of business school and go to Wall Street? What if you actually worked for a company and you wanted to know what decisions that company's making based on what information? And if so, what would that information look like? Well, that's actually my career. I was actually involved in building executive dashboards so that CEOs of Fortune 500 companies could come in and say, I need to know 5 things to start my day so that I need to know whether I'm going to hire people, fire people, buy more, sell more. What am I going to do today? So I have a hands-on experience knowing what executives are looking at and how they get that information. And that's what I try to provide folks is more feet on the street understanding of what really drives the economy. What information sources have changed? What are more relevant than others? What have become obsolete, in fact. So that's my background.
So you have some pretty interesting indicators for the economic situation that we're in right now, and this one has caught my eye, and I've heard other people on our news desk here talking about this as well. How can hooker prices predict the state of the economy? And yes, pre-market show listeners, you heard me right. We're saying hooker prices can predict the state of the economy. Andrew, can you explain that for us?
Yes, Moneyball Economics, we're proud of what we've created, which we call hookernomics. Kind of tongue in cheek, but not really. When you actually look at the numbers out there that are used to give you a handle, a finger on the pulse of what the consumer is doing, they're real skinny. For example, when the consumer sentiment number comes out each month, they're talking to 400 people. Now, 400 people are supposed to give us a sense of what's going on in the U.S. economy. That doesn't work, right?
Right.
That's silly.
Small. So small.
On
Yeah.
the Yeah, you can't do anything with that. On the other hand, I track things like gambling, prostitution, things like that, things that we call vices, some legal, some not, where you've got millions, tens of millions of transactions each month, and I can track that in a very consistent manner going back 25 years. All right, so we've got a better data set, but what does that mean? Well, what I have found, and what every economist will tell you, is if you really want to know what's going on in our economy, you got to track what people are spending money on. And really, you got to track their discretionary and disposable income. Well, at the end of the day, we all have what we call our luxury spending, our vices, really. Vices are sort of a subset of luxury spending. It just so happens that I don't want to track Tiffany spending because that's the 1%. I want to track what everybody else is doing. And so that's why I track basically prostitution spending, um, gambling, bong hits, broads, the Frank Sinatra of the world type of living. And what it's shown me is that you can, standing here today, know whether or not people are going to be spending money tomorrow. And it's all based on, do we have free cash in our pocket? If so, what are we going to spend it on? So what we've been doing is we predict retail very accurately. We beat consensus regularly, and we sort of taking a very practical viewpoint. So, for example, right now everyone gets all bent out of shape over a specific benchmark that comes out on Wall Street. In this case, retail came out, and retail was not exactly the strongest number this week. Well, does that mean the consumer's falling apart? Well, this is where Moneyball Economics comes in and says, wait a second. First off, we've got all this great data, a lot more data than the government's using that says, actually, people are spending a lot of money right now. No one's pulling back. So this particular data point may or may not mean anything. What I then do is I come in and I try to help readers at Moneyball Economics, and come on, its reports are free. What I try to do is help folks understand, retail's a very limited number. Not to go down a rat hole, but retail doesn't include things like vacations. Or in May, I know you guys probably saw the Mayweather fight. That was almost $1 billion of money put down. The pay-per-view alone was almost $500 million. People don't put money down like that just to watch a couple of hours of boxing unless they feel pretty darn good. So what we try to do at Moneyball Economics is go out, second guess what Wall Street's doing. And by the way, we regularly beat consensus when we have to calibrate to the official benchmarks. But what we do is we use better data. And then we try to bring it home and say, and so what should you be doing? Who cares if retail's up or down? What does that mean for me as an investor or as a homeowner? What should I be doing? Does that mean interest rates are going up and should I do something? And that's our goal is to bring it home and better data, better analysis, and better actionable information.
Andrew, I have to know, or maybe I don't want to know, how do you track that kind of spending? Maybe gambling's a little easier because it's regulated, but for something that's illegal and unregulated, where do you even gather that data from?
I'm glad you asked. I hope the producer's on. Tell you what, meet me in Vegas next weekend with $1,000 in unmarked 20s, and I'll show you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, to be honest, and this goes back to my old days where we used to use the internet a lot more than folks understand. Everything is online. Everything. I can sit here today and I can tell you the price of an escort in Hungary. Okay. There
Wow.
is so much information about anything online. I know that sort of spooks people, but don't be. I mean, there's just if you know where to look and you know where to go and you know how to pull the information is out there. Now, let's go offline. I know it's just you and me, Brianna. Really, I hope the IRS isn't listening and they aren't going to audit my expense reports, those $300 contractor fees. No, I mean, to be honest, I mean, we get our hands dirty so that other people don't. But the secret sauce I can't totally reveal, but suffice it to say that I'm pulling millions of pieces of data a month, actual transactions.
Okay.
And just to validate this, the Bank of England, folks may say, who cares about prostitution? Who cares about drugs? Well, to be honest, it's the underground economy, and about 10 to 15% of our economy is this quote underground economy. In England and in Europe, it's even higher. The Bank of England last year formally said for GDP tracking purposes, they're now including illegal drugs and prostitution.
Wow, I did not know that. That is
It,
crazy.
because it's huge. It's a big part of our economy, and the challenge has always been how do you measure it, and that's where we broke through. So there's no issue in terms of should we measure it? Well, yeah, if people are spending money on it, measure it. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the few places where every socioeconomic demographic is going. I'm not saying everyone is indulging. I'm not saying they're all indulging in every single vice, but everyone, no matter your race, religion, sexual orientation, economic, you all have vices, and typically they're one of the four vices I mentioned: alcohol, marijuana. I mean, they estimate 20 million people are smoking marijuana every day in the U.S. Vegas alone gets nearly 3 to 4 million visitors a month. That's just Vegas. So you're talking about a lot of great insight into whether or not people have the ability to spend money on frivolous items. And that alone tells us a lot about the state of mind of the consumer. And then it tells us, hey, if I feel good spending today, am I going to feel good spending tomorrow? And then we're off to the races when it comes to stock picking.
Tell us what these indicators are showing you about the economy right now.
Right now it feels like, you know, I'm going to use a baseball metaphor. Hey, it's Moneyball, right? It feels like we're about in the eighth inning. And what I mean by that is everything's fine. The economy seems to be chugging along. There are some pockets of weakness. We just went through a really bad place where oil prices came down, and the whole energy ecosystem has just taken a big hit, whether it's jobs, other kind of related spending. It's bad. But when you look past that, when you look past California's drought and how that's going to hit a lot of companies like Caterpillar, things are chugging along. Things are doing okay. I've done some analysis, which folks can go see some white papers, where one of the interesting things about our economy today, in the past 20 years, we've had three business cycles that have been the longest business cycles on record. At the same time, they've also become more shallow. So what we want to explore is right now, it feels like the economy can continue along. You can look at all the fundamental benchmarks, like our business is still hiring and so forth, and you'll see that there's no imminent slowdown per se, but it's coming. It is the eighth inning. You want to start thinking defensively, and it's a matter of timing more than anything else. My personal view, the professional view, is in the next year we're going to start to see signs of a recession. It's not going to be like the recession we went through a few years ago, but it's going to be one of these, everyone has the car they need. Everyone's bought everything they need. Wages aren't growing. And so you get to that place where, a recession is where you have a contraction for at least 6 months. I mean, there's just no growth. There's no more gas in the tank. And I think we're not there yet. I think we still have a lot of positives going on for the economy right now. But here we are, we're starting earnings season. I think that's where a lot of the attention is going to be. There could be a relief rally. Last week, we advised everyone jump into the market really fast because, quite frankly, last week all the market shakeout was really unrelated to economics. It was related to companies getting margin calls because suddenly money left us. China and Greece
Mm-hmm.
were suddenly no longer pumping money into the system. Looking past that, companies are still growing. They're still making their numbers. That's where the attention will be today. And then the question is, if we are doing well and the rest of the world is not doing well, how do you factor an interest rate hike into this mess, Janet Yellen?
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. It's like if you're seeing like more of a recession in the future in the upcoming 6 months or so, how is that going to affect, in your opinion, what the Fed decides to do as far as raising interest rates?
So the Fed has this remarkable degree to pick and choose the data they want. And what that really means is if you have kids, you have the same experience where the kid's going to hear one thing and decide what thing, it's like going to a supermarket. They're going to pick and choose what they hear, and that's going to drive their actions. Janet Yellen, this is kind of a cute little story. Take me a couple seconds. Janet Yellen was in charge of the San Francisco Fed until last year or so. Now, the Fed put out on their website, on the homepage, a white paper. Now, that alone, if you're a Fed watcher, that says, hey, that's a neon sign that says, listen to me. This is what I really think. And they did
Mm-hmm.
this huge analysis in this white paper that said, son of a gun, we are deep into a recovery, but the labor market hasn't recovered. What does that mean? Now, if you're an economist, you get really academic and really theoretical and you get bent around the axle. What they're really saying is this: should we move interest rates or not? The Fed likes to think in terms of business cycles. Things get better, things get worse, and they can extend the business cycle if they monkey around with interest rates. That's the cyclical concept. Now, when QE was released and the zero interest rates stuff was going on, there was this big counterfight against the Fed that said, look, this is not a business cycle. This is structural. When Netflix comes in with a couple thousand people and decimates Blockbuster, which had 80,000 workers, that's not cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
You can't expect Blockbuster, 80,000 employees to return just because you drop rates 0.5%. So you have this massive structural change going on. The Fed does a white paper and says, leaping lizards, our own research says not only is this not cyclical change, but structural, meaning it's permanent. It's, hey, we found electricity. Gas lamp lighters aren't going to be employed in the future. We've got cars. We're no longer going to have horse and buggies. They basically came to the conclusion, gosh darn, this is structural, and anything we're doing with interest rates isn't going to do anything. And then the Fed did this. Under Janet Yellen, they concluded something must be wrong with our analysis. We just need more time. Okay, so this is in the world of Moneyball economics. You've harvested all this great data. The data takes you to an inevitable conclusion that you, the Fed, accept, and then you throw it out because you just can't conceptually get your head around the fact that the world is different from the 40 years ago when you got your PhD. So this is Janet Yellen now in charge, willing to throw away any information that conflicts with her worldview, even if the information happens to be factually the right information. And we're sitting here, it's summertime. The Fed's not going to raise rates. You know why? Everyone who matters is on vacation. You don't raise interest rates and monkey around with the system when the seasoned hands aren't there. We haven't had a rate hike. Most of the people working on Wall Street haven't seen a rate hike in their entire career.
Hmm.
And seriously, it's been that long. And all of a sudden, you're going to throw a rate hike out there. No, it's not going to happen until at the earliest September. And I have doubts about whether it's going to happen at all. On the other hand, the Fed's kind of backed itself into a corner, right? They keep talking about it, keep talking about it, keep talking
Right.
about it. Do we still have time? Am I okay?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we got a couple minutes left. I do have a question from the chat that I want to get to you really quick.
Oh,
Yeah, one
let's
of
jump in.
our chat listeners is saying, do you feel that the game is almost over, or are there any extra innings possible for the continuation of the bull market?
Oh yeah, so go to Moneyball Economics, and you'll see some white papers where we do a deep dive into what really drives the market in the business cycle. And what you're going to find is it's a real basic thing, but understand practically everyone out there who has their finger on these decisions got their PhD after the internet was invented. What you're going to find is since the 90s, what the internet did in a very practical sense is it reduced inventory levels. Now, inventory levels are the be all and the end all in a business cycle. What happens is you get these signals that say demand is high, so you run around and you bulk up your inventory of people and things. And then the signals get they aren't good signals before the internet. And so what happened traditionally was you overbuilt, you overhired, and all of a sudden you're stuck with excess inventory, which you then have to flush. Traditional business cycles then had this experience of ramping up really high. And so the GDP would hit 5 or 6%, and then all of a sudden flushing out the inventory at the end of the cycle, and the GDP would collapse 4%. Over the last three business cycles, what you're seeing is the volatility, that sudden surge, and then the collapse in the business cycle. It's tapered out. So, for example, over the last few years, what we've been seeing is GDP 2, 3%, occasionally a little bit higher. GDP going down. What's happening is the internet has enabled this great communication across the supply chain. What that's done in return is all of a sudden, if you look at the amount of inventory that businesses are carrying, it's collapsed almost 30%. I mean, you're talking about companies that used to have $1 trillion of inventory sitting there, suddenly freeing up $250 million of capital, of money that companies no longer have to just sort of sit there on the shelves. This has been what the internet has done to our economy. And as a result, it's freed up all this money, created all this massive flexibility. So on the one hand, we're not running around with shortages, and having to bulk up inventory. That keeps the GDP a little bit lower. But on the other hand, it extends it because we're less prone to these shocks of having too much. So that's why I believe we're going to have a longer business cycle. I mean, let's face it, we're already in a very long cycle. It's been since 2009. We are now about to enter our seventh year of the recovery. This is
Mm-hmm.
huge. And there's no sign of a slowdown per se. We are, however, downshifting. It is the eighth inning. I do believe that the key data I look at is labor. Are companies hiring, yes or no? Companies know whether or not business is picking up, and they respond accordingly. They also know when business is kind of flattening. The data we look at, there are some simple metrics we look at. We look at essentially the only pure data out there is layoffs. If you look at jobless claims, this is millions of people across the country, unmolested data. Most of the data that comes out of the government is massaged and not for political nefarious reasons. It's manipulated. It's partial. It's sampled. The only pure data out there that you can get your hands on that's going to tell you what's really going on in today's economy at this moment, not delayed months or whatever, is the weekly jobless claims. So we read that and we publish a lot of information on it. And basically what we're seeing is right now we are still creating more jobs than we were last year. And that's the key point for an economy. If the economy is growing, we're creating more jobs. Turned around, we're firing fewer people. And so right now we're firing layoffs are about 10% below the level they were last year, but they're starting to bottom. We see the bottom happening in the second half. Now, historically speaking, to use a baseball metaphor, historically speaking, this has a 1,000% historical accuracy of predicting recessions and market downturns. And it does it with about a 6 to 9 month advance. It's very basic. Once companies stop hiring and once they bottom and actually start to think about firing more people than they were last year, that's your cue for the economy has shifted. Right now, we're still laying off fewer people than we were last year. That's a good thing. And yeah, this data point's a little nuanced, but bottom line, as long as we're firing fewer people than we were last year, that's a sign that companies are still hiring, still expanding, still seeing growth in the pipeline. When they stop, and right now, to be honest, 10% isn't a lot of people right now. It's about 25,000 people, the difference between last year and this year. So we are starting to see that gap. When you think of it in actual number terms, it's not that big anymore, and it's shrinking every month. If I
Hey,
had to draw a straight line, second half, excuse me, first half next year is when we're going to see trouble.
that's a great point, Andrew. I love that you brought that up. Guys, if you're looking for economic indicators of growth, look in the labor markets. Are companies hiring? Are they firing people? Are they laying them off? We've been on the line with Andrew Zatlin. He's the editor of Moneyball Economics. Andrew, what a wild interview we've had. I've personally really enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us on the show this morning. We will definitely have to bring you back on again soon.
Oh, thanks. And hey, everyone, have a great Wednesday.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.